everyone. I had some technical difficulties finishing out the last video. Let me just pick things up where we left off here regarding the square of opposition, just to kind of come to some concluding points. So this is a diagram of the full square of opposition and all of the immediate inferences that we're able to make. This occurs on page 209 of our Baronet textbook. I recommend that you refer back to the square as often as possible as you're working on these problems. So we now have our four categories of proposition: A, E, I, and O. As you now know, the A propositions, the universal propositions are occurring at the top here, right? With our universal affirmatives and our universal negatives. At the bottom, we have our particular claims. Some S are P for I, and some S are not P for O. We have our relationship of contradiction. A and O are contradictory. E and I are contradictory, right? So we have this inside the box, a kind of relationship of diagonal opposition, and we know that contradictories have opposite truth values. At the top of the square, the relationship between the A and the E is said to be contrary. We know that the values with contraries are very close to contradiction. We can make the immediate inference from a true contrary that its opposing contrary is false. However, we can't go from false to true. Beginning with a false contrary, like a false E claim, yields either a true or a false A claim. So the A claim is said to be undetermined. We just don't have enough information in that case. Going down to the particulars at the bottom of the square, the relationship of I to O is that of subcontrarity. Subcontraries are very close in structure to contraries, but the values are opposed. When we begin with a false I claim, we know that the O claim is true. However, if we start with a true O claim, the corresponding I claim is undetermined. We don't have enough information to make that immediate inference. Now, if we think about the relationship of the universal to the particular, the A to the I, or the E to the O, we have this name for that relationship, subalternation. And we learned that the true values at the top of the square for the universal do flow down. So if we begin with a true A claim, the diagram on the square gives us the information that we can make the inference that the corresponding I claim is also true. Truth flows down with necessity. So we always know the relationship of the universal to the corresponding particular when we begin with a true claim. If we begin with a false claim at the bottom of the square, we know that the corresponding universal is also false, because falsity, as we can see with this arrow here, flows up. However, if we begin with a true claim at the bottom, we can't make the immediate inference that the universal is also true. That is an indeterminate inference, and so the A claim is said to be undetermined. So try to drill in your head as much as possible that truth flows down and false flows up. This is true for A and I, and the values are exactly the same with E and O. A true E claim means that we can generate a true O claim. We know the O claim is true. A false O claim means that the corresponding E claim is false. But a false E claim does not necessarily generate a false O claim. The O claim is said to be undetermined, and a true O claim does not necessarily generate a true E claim. The E claim in that case would be undetermined. Okay, so have a look back as often as you need on page 209 to this square of opposition. Try to really internalize the relations of inference here and the values that correspond to them. So just to give you a sort of a technical definition of what we're doing here, what we're doing are work with immediate arguments. Immediate arguments only have one premise, right? So this isn't true for every type of argument. Eventually we're going to spend a lot of time on syllogisms where we have two premises and a conclusion. But the square of opposition allows us, with the categories of proposition that we've sort of unpacked, to make immediate inferences with the square. All right. So if we begin, for example, with a premise like this, if you just have a look with me, if I can get out of the way here. All elected politicians are people who serve a term in office. This is a true A proposition. We're just going to be given the value of true, and we have to decode a little bit, again, what category of proposition this is. All elected politicians are people who serve a term of office. This is a universal affirmative. Try to think about the relationships on the square that this will generate. If I've given a conclusion like this, some elected politicians are people who serve a term of office, just try to think about two things for me, if you would, and write this down. First, what category of proposition has been generated here? Where have we moved on the square? From where to where? So what is the abbreviated letter type and the corresponding category? And then try to see if you can infer, with our laws of immediate arguments on the square, the truth value. Is this a true, false, or undetermined proposition? So first write down the category type and then the truth value, if you can discover it. If you said this is a true I proposition, you are correct. This is the subaltern of the A proposition on the square, right? So on the far left, we're moving from a true A to a true I. And we know that because truth flows down on the square of opposition, a true universal affirmative generates a true particular affirmative, an I proposition. That is an immediate inference that we're allowed to make because of what we know about subalternation. Let's compare a little bit, a variation on this sentence. No elected politicians are people who serve a term of office. Let's say that this is a false claim. We know it is an E proposition, right? This is our universal negative, so it's on the far right of the square. And if we're generated this corresponding sentence, all elected politicians are people who serve a term of office. Try to write down, once again, first the type of proposition this is generated. What is the second sentence in terms of our four categories? And what is the truth value? Can you determine if this is true, false, or not, based on the type of opposition here between sentence 1 and sentence 2? So if we move from an E proposition to all elected politicians are people who serve a term in office, what is that second sentence in terms of its category? And what is the inference type? What is the truth value? You'll notice that this now is an A proposition, right? This is a universal affirmative. And on the square of opposition, we know that A and E are contraries. But if we begin with a false contrary, we can't make an immediate inference about the truth value of the other contrary, right? So if we began with that false E proposition, we can indeed, in a determinate way, generate the contrary, the A proposition, but we don't know anything about the truth value. It could either be true or false. We just don't know in the sense of immediate inferences. Okay. Now, if this had been a true E proposition, we could infer that the corresponding contrary, the A proposition, is false, because they both can't be true at the same time. However, they can, logically speaking, be false at the same time. So the value is undetermined. All right, so do a little more practice here. Let's think through this a little bit. The subcontrary of some columnists are coffee drinkers is what? We have a few options here. First, what is the category of this proposition? Try to write that down. This is a particular affirmative, right? This is our I proposition. And which of these do you think is the subcontrary? Is it A, all columnists are coffee drinkers? Is it B, no columnists are coffee drinkers? Or is it C, some columnists are not coffee drinkers? A, B, or C? What is the subcontrary of that I proposition? If you said C, you are correct, right? The O has to be the subcontrary on the square of opposition. The I begins at the bottom left of the square as the particular affirmative. The subcontrary moves us over to the right, but still at the bottom. So the particular negative is the O proposition. Since some columnists are coffee drinkers is an I, its subcontrary has to be an O proposition. Okay, so try to familiarize yourself with the relationships of the four categories on the square in terms of these different types of inference: contradiction, contrariety, subcontrariety, and subalternation. Make sure that you become very, very comfortable with those moves. Let's do another example. If I say it is true that some physicians are not good communicators, then the proposition no physicians are good communicators is what? We begin with some physicians are not good communicators. That value is true. Then we're looking for the value of no physicians are good communicators. Is it true? Is it false? Or is it undetermined? So the first thing you want to do is think about the type of category that the first sentence is. Where does it fit on the square? And then try to think about the category of the second sentence. No physicians are good communicators. And then think about what is the transformation that's occurred. What type of opposition has happened on the square, in terms of which we can come up with the truth value. All right, let's check our work. The correct answer is C, undetermined. We know that the first proposition is an O proposition. This is a particular negative, right? Some physicians are not good communicators. If that is a true proposition, and we're starting on the far lower right of the square as a subaltern, its corresponding superaltern has to be the E proposition. No physicians are good communicators. But because of the law of subalternation, we can't make an immediate inference from an O, a true O claim, to an E claim. Truth only flows down. So the corresponding E proposition, no physicians are good communicators, is said to be undetermined. We just don't have enough information to make that immediate inference. Okay, so remember that truth only flows down. It does not flow up. Falsity flows up. So if our starting O proposition had been false, we could have made the inference that the corresponding E proposition was false as well. But we began with a true O proposition. Okay, that's enough for now. Do make sure you review the square of opposition, and I encourage you to have a look at some of the sample questions at the end of the chapter. We will continue with this in the next video.